Welcome to my channel. Today we're talking about the first anime to ever premiere in America, Magic Boy. Now I know what you're thinking. Wait, hold on. Wasn't the first anime to hit America's shores Speed Racer or Astro Boy? It came out in 1961. A full decade before Speed Racer premiered in the US. Not only had the term not been coined yet, but the internet and streaming didn't exist either. The first anime film ever to come to America didn't even have the word anime in its title. Magic Boy, along with two other Toei animation films, Panda and the Magic Serpent and Orgasm the Great, all came out within a month of each other in 1961. A lot of that comes from the fact that the movie mixes together elements from different cultures. The hero's journey, the main plot, and even some of the characters were inspired by European fairy tales, while the setting and mystical elements were drawn from Japanese mythology. And the movie flopped. But that doesn't mean it's a bad movie. After all, it paved the way for anime to enter the Western market and become a household staple. Imagine that! Without Magic Boy, it's possible that Speed Racer, Astro Boy, and shows like Cowboy Bebop and Naruto might never have reached a Western audience. And that's a scary thought. The result is a curious hybrid that feels unlike any anime I've ever seen. It was the first anime movie to ever grace Western screens. A pioneer that dared to blur cultural lines and introduce a new form of animation to the world. It's a classic movie for a classic channel, and we hope you enjoyed learning all about it. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. At times, it almost feels like a Disney movie, but with a hint of Japanese flavor. And at others, it feels like a distinctly Japanese adventure with Disney-inspired music and a sprinkle of Western flair. Of course, it's not a perfect blend. Things like the weirdly mixed soundtrack, the clunky dubbing, and the lack of subtitles make it hard to fully immerse ourselves in either world. It feels like a classic movie stuck in the awkward transition between two different versions of itself. Not only does this suggest a lack of planning on behalf of the distributors, but it was also a terrible idea to flood the market with 3 films nobody had asked for. Back in the 60s, Disney was the king of animation, and their formula for storytelling was unrivaled. Toei Animation looked at Disney's success and adapted it to Japanese folklore. The result was a movie that played to Western expectations, while bringing in distinctly Eastern themes. Think about it. The basic story beats and structure are like classic Disney movies. The hero sets off on a journey to defeat an evil witch, save his friends, and return home a better person. But the characters in setting are straight out of Japanese lore. We re-meeting animal companions that are spirits from Japanese folklore. And the villain is a demon straight out of ancient mythology. By blending Disney-esque storytelling with Japanese folklore, Magic Boy created a unique style of animation that was both familiar and exotic. It was like experiencing a distant culture through a Western lens. And that fusion is exactly what made Magic Boy such a fascinating movie. Sure, they were dubbed into English and given wide releases, but none of them became big hits, and all 3 quickly disappeared into obscurity. Today, fans refer to them as the Forgotten Toei Trilogy. Toei Animation actually shelved these films for decades, never releasing them on home video or giving them any kind of re-release. Toei was focused on producing new work and didn't seem to want anything to do with these early projects. It wasn't until 2014 that Warner Archive released Magic Boy on DVD, and sadly, that's the only one of the trilogy that's ever seen an official release in the US. In fact, it was called Magic Boy, period. Back in the early days, the distinction between manga, anime, and cartoons just wasn't there. Entertainment was entertainment, and anime was simply one piece of the pie. Even Speed Racer and Astro Boy were often grouped in with other cartoons rather than having a special label attached. Heck, even Disney shows like Mickey Mouse were sometimes lumped in with other non-Disney cartoons on TV. In the early days, Anime was just a small part of a larger whole, and since most folks involved with it didn't even know the word anime existed, they certainly wouldn't have used it in the credits. The only way to watch these shows was on television, and you had to live in an area that showed them, which wasn't everyone. Now, I know this might sound crazy to our modern ears, but back then, people didn't spend hundreds of dollars a month on streaming services, and buying DVDs was over a decade away. In the 1960s, TV was the new frontier of entertainment. And if you wanted to catch the latest episode of whatever show was on, well, you'd better tune in when it aired. Basically, watching anime in the 60s was a lot like watching cable TV today. There were a few channels and limited options, and if you missed an episode, well, tough luck. That was the reality of the era. It a whole 17 years before the anime boom that gave us classics like Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z. Before we dive into the movie, though, I think we need to explain how something like this could happen without us knowing about it. Anime was already popular in the US in the 60s, right? How did a movie premiere and just disappear? Well, back then, Japan hadn't quite hit the heights of worldwide popularity yet. Sure, shows like Speed Racer and Astro Boy would go on to become massive hits, but at the time, anime was a lot less mainstream. Now, those shows are considered pillars of anime history. But in the 1960s, they were just two of several dozen Japanese series that found their way to America. Of course, the fact that they became huge hits while most others didn't is kind of a miracle, but it's undeniable that they left a monumental impact on the future of animation. Back then, though, they were just part of the landscape. They weren't special. And as far as the American public was concerned, they were just cartoons. Was that really the first one? Well, that's actually a really interesting question, but it's also a little bit complicated. So stick around and I'll tell you all about it. Before we get into it, though, I have to ask you for a favor. Please subscribe. My goal for 2023 is to grow our community. There's lots of anime history out there, and I can only share it if you here to watch. It's super easy, and it helps us both. We get to explore all kinds of crazy stuff from the dawn of Japanese animation to the birth of your favorite shows and everything else in between. And you'll never miss an episode by subscribing. Okay, let's get into it. So this is Magic Boy, the first anime movie to ever play in American theaters. In fact, even the word anime didn't exist back then. So now that we understand how anime was viewed back then, let's get back to Magic Boy. But enough about the terminology. What actually happened to Magic Boy? How could such a historic film just fade away? Well, the story is kind of sad. Now, even though Magic Boy was the first film of its kind, there's no denying that it feels kinda odd today. One of the most striking things about Magic Boy is how it blurs the line between Japanese animation and Disney. Sadly, American audiences weren't ready for a mix of Japanese culture and Disney-like storytelling. So maybe Magic Boy wasn't the best movie, but it was important.